Robert Mitchell parked his 10-year-old sedan in the visitors section of the gleaming Mitchell Industries parking garage. He straightened his tie in the rearview mirror, noticing how his graying hair made him look older than his 52 years. The contrast between his modest car and the luxury vehicles surrounding it wasn't lost on him. "Just get through today," he whispered to himself. For 30 years, Robert had lived a quiet life away from the spotlight that constantly followed his older brother William. While William built Mitchell Industries from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire, Robert had pursued a steady career as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm across the country. The brothers spoke maybe once a year, usually at their mother's insistence during holidays. Robert grabbed his worn leather briefcase and walked toward the towering glass building that bore his family name. He'd only been here twice before, once for the grand opening 20 years ago and again for his nephew James's promotion celebration 5 years back. The receptionist looked up as he approached. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm Robert Mitchell. I have a meeting with the board of directors." Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Mitchell's brother. Of course, they're expecting you in the penthouse conference room." The elevator ride to the top floor gave Robert time to think. 3 days ago, he'd been reviewing quarterly reports at his desk when he received the call that William had suffered a massive stroke. By the time Robert reached the hospital, his brother was unresponsive, hooked up to machines that beeped and hissed. What happened next still felt unreal. The company lawyers arrived with documents showing that William had named Robert, not William's son James, as his successor should anything happen to him. No one was more shocked than Robert himself. The elevator doors opened to reveal a floor of glass-walled offices and busy employees who barely glanced his way. A tall woman in a sharp suit approached. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Lisa Chen, your brother's executive assistant. The board is ready for you." She led him to a large conference room where 12 people sat around a massive table. Their conversation stopped when he entered. Robert recognized a few faces from business magazines and TV interviews. These people controlled one of the largest tech companies in the world, and they were all staring at him. An older man with silver hair stood. "Robert, I'm Harold Thompson, chairman of the board. Please take a seat." He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table, William's chair. Robert sat down, feeling like an imposter. "Thank you all for meeting with me on such short notice." "We were surprised by William's succession plan," Harold said, choosing his words carefully. "James has been working directly under William for years. Everyone assumed he would take over." Robert nodded. "I was just as surprised as you all. I haven't spoken to my brother about business matters in years." A woman halfway down the table leaned forward. "With all due respect, Mr. Mitchell, what do you know about running a technology company? Your background is in personal financial planning." Before Robert could answer, the door burst open. James Mitchell stormed in, his face flushed with anger. At 32, he was the spitting image of William in his younger days. Tall, confident, with the same piercing blue eyes. "Is this some kind of joke?" James demanded, looking around the room before fixing his gaze on Robert. "My father has a stroke, and suddenly my uncle, who hasn't been part of this company ever, is taking over." The room fell silent. Robert felt everyone's eyes on him. "James," Harold started, "this isn't the time." "When is the time?" James interrupted. "While my father is fighting for his life in the hospital, you're all sitting here with this stranger who knows nothing about what we do." Robert stood slowly. For years, he'd lived in William's shadow, always the lesser Mitchell brother. But something in him had changed when he saw his powerful brother looking small and vulnerable in that hospital bed. "James," Robert said quietly, "I understand this is difficult. But your father made his decision, and until he recovers, I intend to honor it." James laughed bitterly. "And what's your first order of business?" "Planning the company picnic." Robert held his nephew's gaze. "Actually, my first order of business is reviewing the financial reports from the last 5 years. All of them." Something flickered across James's face, so quickly that Robert almost missed it. Was it surprise? Or was it fear? The board members exchanged glances. Robert didn't know what his brother had discovered that made him change his succession plan, but he intended to find out. And judging by the tension in the room, he wasn't the only one with secrets. James Mitchell stared at the family photos lining his office wall. There he was at age 8, sitting on his father's shoulders at the company's first headquarters, a converted warehouse with leaky pipes and spotty heating. Another showed him at 16, proudly displaying the code he'd written for his first app, while William beamed beside him. The largest photo was from his graduation day at Harvard Business School, his father's arm around his shoulder as they both smiled at the camera. "Mr. Mitchell," his assistant Tom poked his head through the doorway. "Your uncle wants to see you in the main office." James checked his watch. It had been exactly 1 week since his father's stroke, 6 days since the board meeting where his uncle had announced his takeover. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes." He said immediately, sir. James felt heat rising in his neck, but nodded. He straightened his tie and walked the long hallway to what had been his father's office, what should have been his office. Employees watched him pass, quickly averting their eyes when he looked their way. The whispers had been constant all week. The main office door was open. Robert sat behind the massive desk, poring over financial reports spread across the surface. He didn't look up when James entered. "Close the door," Robert said, still focused on the papers. James did as instructed, then stood waiting. The office looked different already. His father's collection of vintage tech prototypes had been moved to a side table. The whiteboard where William sketched new product ideas was now covered with financial flowcharts. Finally, Robert looked up, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, please." James remained standing. "What's this about?" "It's about Project Horizon." James blinked, trying to keep his face neutral. Project Horizon was his baby, a revolutionary new operating system that would take Mitchell Industries into the next decade. He'd been working on it for 3 years. "What about it?" "I'm shutting it down." The words hit James like a physical blow. "You can't do that. My father approved that project personally. We've invested millions." $37 million, to be exact, Robert interrupted. With no prototype to show for it, no patents filed, and a team that's missed every deadline for the past year. "Innovation takes time," James said, his voice rising. "My father understood that. We're creating something revolutionary." Robert closed the folder in front of him. "Your father built this company by delivering products on time and under budget. All I see with Horizon is money going out and nothing coming in." "So that's it? You've been CEO for a week, and you're already dismantling my father's vision." "I'm protecting your father's company," Robert replied, his voice even. "And speaking of protection, I'm also restructuring the executive team." James felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "Meaning what?" "Meaning your position as Chief Innovation Officer no longer exists." The room seemed to tilt. James gripped the back of the chair in front of him. "You're firing me." "You can't fire me from my own family's company." "I'm not firing you," Robert said. "I'm offering you a position in product development. You'll report to the new CTO, who starts next week." James stared in disbelief. "You want me to take a demotion and report to someone you've hired? Someone who knows nothing about what we do here?" "She has 20 years of experience in the industry." "This is ridiculous," James said, his voice shaking with rage. "Everyone knows I'm the reason we've stayed ahead of our competitors. Ask anyone in this building who created our most successful products." Robert stood up. "Your father created this company. You've been riding his coattails. It's time you earned your place here instead of expecting it as your birthright." James felt something snap inside him. "You know nothing about me or what I've contributed. You're just some small-time number cruncher who got lucky because my father had a stroke." Robert's face hardened. "That's your answer then?" "I won't be demoted in my own company." "Then I'll have security escort you out." Robert pressed a button on the desk phone. "Please send security to the main office." Within minutes, 2 guards arrived. James looked around the office one last time, at the space where he'd spent countless hours with his father planning the future. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. As the guards led him through the open workspace, employees stared. Some looked away in embarrassment, others watched with undisguised shock. By tomorrow, every tech blog and business news site would be reporting that William Mitchell's son had been kicked out of Mitchell Industries. From the penthouse window, Robert watched his nephew exit the building. He felt no satisfaction, only a grim determination to follow through on his brother's final instructions, find the truth, no matter where it leads. Robert turned back to the financial reports, searching for the answers William had begun to uncover before his stroke. The news spread like wildfire. By evening, James Mitchell's removal from Mitchell Industries was trending on every business website. Stock prices dropped 8% in a single day as investors questioned Robert's leadership. Industry analysts called it corporate suicide to remove the young visionary who had been the face of the company's innovation for years. Robert ignored it all. In William's office, his office now, he worked late into the night, poring over financial records from the past 5 years. Something didn't add up, and he was determined to find out what his brother had discovered. Around midnight, his phone rang. It was Lisa Chen, his brother's assistant. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to call so late, but I thought you should know that James was seen entering the hospital an hour ago. He's with your brother now." Robert rubbed his tired eyes. "Thank you, Lisa. Is there any change in William's condition?" "The doctors say it's the same. He's stable but unresponsive." After hanging up, Robert leaned back in his chair, thinking about James sitting by his father's bedside. Despite everything, he felt a pang of sympathy for his nephew. Whatever was happening at Mitchell Industries, James's love for his father seemed genuine. In the dimly lit hospital room, James sat beside the still form of his father. The only sounds were the steady beep of heart monitors and the soft hiss of the ventilator helping William breathe. "I don't understand, Dad," James whispered, holding his father's limp hand. "Why did you choose him? After everything we built together?" William's face remained slack, offering no answers. James had spent the day drinking, trying to drown his humiliation, but now he just felt hollow. His phone buzzed with another message from a tech reporter wanting a statement. He ignored it, just like he'd ignored the 50 others. What could he possibly say? That his own father had betrayed him? That his uncle had destroyed his career in less than 10 minutes? A soft knock at the door made him look up. It was Beth, his father's longtime personal assistant, different from Lisa, who handled his business affairs. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said quietly. "How is he?" "The same," James replied. "The doctors say all we can do is wait." Beth nodded, then glanced nervously at the door before closing it. "James, there's something you should know." She pulled a small flash drive from her pocket. "Your father asked me to give you this if anything ever happened to him. He was very specific, only if he couldn't speak for himself, and only to you, not Robert." James took the flash drive, confused. "What's on it?" "I don't know. He encrypted it." Beth squeezed his arm. But he was acting strangely in the weeks before his stroke, working late, locking his office door, which he never used to do. He seemed afraid of something. After Beth left, James stared at the small device in his palm. He slipped it into his pocket and kissed his father's forehead before leaving. Back at his apartment, James plugged the flash drive into his laptop. It requested a password. He tried several: his father's birthday, the company founding date, their family vacation spot, all incorrect. Finally, he tried the name of their first family dog, and the drive unlocked. Inside was a single folder labeled Truth. His hands shaking slightly, James opened it to find a collection of his father's private journal entries, scanned and dated over the past 6 months. The most recent entry, from just 3 days before the stroke, made his blood run cold. "I've confirmed my suspicions. Someone has been stealing from the company for years, millions siphoned through fake vendor accounts. Worse, they've been selling our newest technology to competitors. The evidence points to someone in my inner circle. I've brought Robert in to investigate because he's the only one I can trust completely. He has no connections to anyone here. If I'm right about who's behind this, it will break my heart. God help me, all signs point to James." James stared at the screen in shock, reading the words over and over. His father suspected him of stealing, of industrial espionage. It was insane. Then a terrible thought struck him. What if Robert had seen these journals? What if this was why his uncle was going through all the financial records? His phone rang, startling him. The caller ID showed it was David Chen, the company's chief financial officer and his father's closest friend. The man who had mentored James since he was a teenager. "James," David said when he answered, "we need to talk. It's about your uncle." "I think I know what he's really doing at Mitchell Industries." Robert hadn't left the office in 3 days. His jacket hung on the back of the chair, his tie loosened around his neck. Empty coffee cups littered the desk, and takeout containers filled the trash bin. On the whiteboard covering one wall, he had created a complex web of transactions, companies, and dates, all connected with red and blue lines. Lisa knocked on the doorframe. "You should get some rest, Mr. Mitchell." Robert rubbed his bloodshot eyes. "There's no time. Look at this." He pointed to the board. Over the last 5 years, someone created 6 fake vendor companies. Mitchell Industries has paid them nearly $20 million for services never rendered. Do you know who's behind it? Not yet, but I'm close. Robert tapped a section of the board where several lines converged. All the money went through offshore accounts before disappearing. These transactions were approved by someone with executive access. "James?" Lisa asked quietly. Robert sighed. "His electronic signature is on the paperwork. But something doesn't feel right. These schemes started when he was just joining the company. He was barely 27, still learning the ropes. He's always been ambitious." "Yes, but this," Robert gestured at the board, "this is sophisticated. This took someone who knew the company inside and out." His phone buzzed. It was the private investigator he'd hired to watch James. The message contained a photo of James meeting with David Chen, the company's CFO, at a small cafe across town. Robert frowned. Chen had been unusually cooperative since the takeover, offering to help with the transition. A little too helpful, perhaps. "I need everything we have on David Chen," Robert told Lisa. "His employment history, financial records, everything." Across town, James sat across from David Chen in a corner booth of a nearly empty cafe. The older man looked nervous, constantly checking the door. "I think your uncle knows," David said in a low voice. "He's been going through all the financial records." "Knows what exactly?" James asked. "That my father thought I was stealing from the company." David's eyes widened. "How did you?" "I found my father's journals. He suspected me." James leaned forward. "But it wasn't me, David. I would never betray him." David looked down at his untouched coffee. "No, it wasn't you." James felt the air leave his lungs. "What are you saying?" "Your father discovered irregularities in the books about 6 months ago. He came to me first, asked me to look into it quietly." "And?" David's hands trembled slightly. "I told him I couldn't find anything. But the truth is, I'd been covering my tracks for years." James stared at the man he'd trusted since childhood. You've been stealing from us." "It wasn't like that at first." David's voice dropped to a whisper. "I made a bad investment years ago, lost everything. I just needed a loan from the company. I was going to pay it back. But you didn't. Things spiraled. I kept needing more. Then some competitors approached me, offering money for information about your new products." David looked up, his eyes pleading. "I never meant for it to go so far." "Does my uncle know it was you?" "Not yet, but he will soon. That's why we need to stop him." David pulled out his phone, showing James a document. "This gives you emergency control of the company if both your father and Robert are deemed unfit to lead. Your father signed it years ago as a failsafe." James frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "File it tomorrow. Say your uncle is making rash decisions, destroying company value. The board will back you. They're already nervous about the stock price." David leaned closer. "Once you're in control, we can make the financial issues disappear. No one ever needs to know." James felt sick. This man had been like a second father to him, and all along he'd been the one betraying the company, letting James take the blame. "I need time to think," James said, standing up. "There is no time," David hissed. "He's already found the fake vendors. It won't be long before he traces them back to me. And if I go down, I'll tell them you knew everything." "But I didn't." David's face hardened. "Who do you think they'll believe? The trusted CFO who's worked with your father for 20 years, or the entitled son who just lost his job?" As James walked out of the cafe, his mind raced. He needed proof of David's confession, but it was his word against the CFO's. Then he remembered something. The security cameras at Mitchell Industries recorded everything, including his final meeting with Robert. There might be footage of David accessing restricted files or systems. James needed to get back into the building, and there was only one person who could help him now. The Mitchell Industries building looked different at night. The gleaming glass tower that usually buzzed with activity now stood dark and silent, with only security lights glowing in the lobby. James parked his car 2 blocks away and walked, pulling his hood up against the light rain. He'd called Lisa, his father's business assistant, and was surprised when she agreed to meet him. 10 minutes, she'd said. That's all I can give you. She was waiting at the side entrance, nervously checking her watch. I could lose my job for this, she whispered as she swiped her key card. I just need to check something in the security archives, James said. I won't touch anything else. They took the service elevator to the security floor. Lisa used her override code to enter the monitoring room, which was empty at this hour. The night guards were making their rounds. 5 minutes, Lisa said, glancing at the door. The guards will be back soon. James sat at the main computer and searched for footage from his last day at the company. He found the video of his confrontation with Robert, but that wasn't what he needed. He searched further back, looking for anything with David Chen. Come on, he muttered, checking folder after folder. James, we need to go, Lisa urged, watching the door. Just 1 more minute there. James clicked on a file from 2 days before his father's stroke. It showed William's office late at night. David entered without knocking, looking agitated. There was no audio, but the body language was clear, an argument. William pointed accusingly, while David's hands moved in denial. Then William held up a folder, slapping it on the desk. James downloaded the file to a flash drive. I need to find that folder. James, that's enough. We have to. The door opened. Robert stood there, flanked by 2 security guards. I thought you might try something like this, Robert said, his voice eerily calm. He looked at Lisa. You can go. After Lisa left, James and Robert stared at each other across the dim room, the security monitors casting a blue glow on their faces. How did you know I'd be here? James asked. I had you followed after your meeting with David Chen. Robert stepped further into the room. Did he convince you to try to take back the company? It's not what you think. James held up the flash drive. I found something. About David. Robert's eyes narrowed. What about him? He's the one who's been stealing from the company. Not me. James gestured to the computer. I have proof. Show me. James played the video again. Robert watched in silence, his expression unreadable. This doesn't prove anything except that they argued, Robert said finally. My father suspected someone was stealing, and it wasn't me, it was David. He admitted it to me today. James ran a hand through his hair in frustration. He's been taking money for years and selling our technology to competitors. And I'm supposed to believe you. The same nephew who called me a small-time number cruncher a week ago. I was wrong about you, James admitted. And my father was wrong about me. David made it look like I was involved, but I wasn't. Robert studied him for a long moment. Where is David now? I don't know. After our meeting, James stopped as a thought struck him. The hospital. If he thinks I might expose him, he might try to get to my father's office before we do. They raced to the parking garage, taking Robert's car. The drive to the hospital was tense, neither man speaking until Robert finally broke the silence. Your father's last coherent words to me were about you, he said, eyes on the road. He said, protect James, even from himself. James stared at his uncle. He said that. He wasn't sure if you were involved or being used. That's why he put me in charge, to find out the truth without destroying your reputation if you were innocent. When they arrived at the hospital, they hurried to William's room. But when they opened the door, they froze. William Mitchell was sitting up in bed, his eyes open. A nurse was checking his vital signs while a doctor made notes on a chart. Dad, James whispered. William turned his head slowly, his movements weak but deliberate. His eyes focused first on James, then moved to Robert. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a raspy sound came out. The doctor turned to them. He woke up about 20 minutes ago. He's still very weak, but his brain function appears intact. It's quite remarkable. Has anyone else been here tonight? Robert asked urgently. Just the standard medical staff, the doctor replied. James approached the bed, taking his father's hand. Dad, can you hear me? William squeezed his son's fingers weakly. James felt tears welling in his eyes. David Chen, William whispered, his voice barely audible. Where is he? Robert and James exchanged a look. We don't know, Robert answered. But we need to find him. Now. Just then, Robert's phone rang. It was the security team at Mitchell Industries. Sir, there's been a breach in the financial database. Someone's deleting files remotely. Lock it down, Robert ordered. And call the police. Tell them it's David Chen. As they rushed back to the car, James looked at his uncle. Will they catch him in time? Robert's face was grim. I don't know. But even if he deletes everything, we have your father now. He can tell us what he knows. If his memory is intact, James said quietly. Neither spoke the fear that hung between them, that William might have lost crucial memories during his stroke, and with them, the final pieces of evidence they needed to expose David's crimes. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of William's hospital room. He sat propped up against pillows, looking pale but alert. The doctors had been amazed by his recovery. While he still had some weakness on his left side, his mind was sharp. James and Robert sat on either side of his bed, both exhausted after a sleepless night. The police had put out an alert for David Chen, but so far he had vanished. Start from the beginning, William said, his voice still raspy from the breathing tube that had been removed only hours ago. I need to know everything. Robert explained how he had traced the financial discrepancies, while James described his confrontation with David at the cafe. William listened intently, occasionally closing his eyes as if picturing the events. I started noticing problems about 6 months ago, William said when they finished. Small things at first, budget overruns, missing equipment. Then I found transfers to companies I'd never heard of. The fake vendors, Robert nodded. I trusted David completely, William continued, pain evident in his voice. We built this company together. When I confronted him, he denied everything. William looked at his son. But he planted evidence pointing to you, James. I didn't want to believe it. That's why you called me, Robert said. William nodded. I needed someone with financial expertise who wasn't connected to anyone at the company. Someone I could trust completely. He reached for his brother's hand. I'm sorry for putting you in that position, Robert. I know you never wanted to be part of the corporate world. Family comes first, Robert said simply. A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Powell entered, her expression serious. We found David Chen, she announced. He was trying to board a private plane to Buenos Aires. Did you arrest him? James asked eagerly. We did. But there's a problem. Powell looked uncomfortable. Most of the financial records were deleted before we could secure the servers. Without that evidence, it's going to be difficult to prove the full extent of his crimes. Robert frowned. But we still have the video of him arguing with William and James's testimony about his confession. It's not enough for the kind of charges we want to bring, Powell explained. We need concrete evidence of the fraud. What about backups? William asked. We keep encrypted backups off-site. James and Robert exchanged looks. The backups are on a monthly schedule, James said. The most recent one would be from 3 weeks ago, before David started deleting files. That might work, Powell nodded, if we can access those backups. I'll call our IT team, Robert began, reaching for his phone. No, William stopped him. David had access to all our systems. We can't trust anyone who worked closely with him. He turned to James. Remember Project Phoenix? James's eyes widened. The hidden backup system. William nodded. I set it up 2 years ago after that ransomware scare. Only 3 people know about it. You, me, and the head programmer who built it. Where are these backups stored? Powell asked. A separate server farm, air-gapped from our main system, William explained. It takes daily snapshots of all financial transactions. James was already on his feet. I can access it from the development lab at the old headquarters. David never goes there. He thinks it's just where we keep outdated equipment. I'll come with you, Robert said, standing. William grabbed his brother's wrist. Wait. Before you go, there's something else. He looked between his son and brother. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss the company's future. They're nervous about the scandal, the stock price drop. What are you saying? Robert asked. I'm saying they'll want stability. A clear chain of command, William said. Robert, I named you as my successor because I needed your skills to uncover the truth, but the company's future belongs to James. Robert nodded slowly. I agree. No, James said, surprising them both. Dad, these past days have shown me how little I actually knew about running the company. I was focused on the flashy stuff, new products, big ideas, but I ignored the foundation. He looked at his uncle. Robert understands the financial side in a way I never bothered to learn. William studied his son with new respect. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we need both of us, James said. Robert handling operations and finance, me leading product development and innovation. A partnership. Robert looked stunned. After everything that's happened, you'd be willing to work with me. You protected me when you thought I might be guilty, James said. That says a lot about your character. He extended his hand. Partners? Robert took it. Partners. William smiled for the first time since waking. Now go get those backups. We have a thief to catch. 6 months later, the Mitchell Industries auditorium was packed for the annual company showcase. Employees, investors, and tech journalists filled every seat, buzzing with excitement. On stage, a large screen displayed the company's new logo, the traditional M now intertwined with a phoenix rising from flames. Behind the curtain, James adjusted his tie nervously. Are you sure about this? He asked his uncle. Robert nodded, checking his notes one last time. It's your design. You should present it. But we agreed to do this together. And we will. Robert squeezed his nephew's shoulder. But this moment belongs to you. The lights dimmed and the audience quieted. James took a deep breath and walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. Good morning, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. 1 year ago, Mitchell Industries was at a crossroads. Today, I'm proud to say we're stronger than ever. From his front row seat, William smiled proudly, looking much healthier than he had 6 months ago. Next to him sat Lisa, recently promoted to Chief Operating Officer after her help had proven invaluable during the company's transformation. Many of you know the story, James continued. How a trusted executive betrayed our company. How my uncle Robert stepped in during my father's illness and uncovered the truth. He gestured to the side of the stage. Robert, please join me. Robert walked out, and the two men stood side by side, a united front that would have seemed impossible months earlier. What you may not know, Robert said, taking over, is how close we came to losing everything. The evidence we recovered from our hidden backup system revealed that David Chen had stolen over $30 million and sold proprietary technology worth 10 times that amount to our competitors. But that wasn't the worst part, James added. The worst damage was to trust, the trust between colleagues, between family members. He looked at his father in the front row. Trust that we've worked hard to rebuild. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone in the tech industry had followed the scandal, but this was the first time the Mitchell family had spoken so openly about it. Today, we're not just launching a new product, Robert continued. We're introducing a new Mitchell Industries, one built on transparency, accountability, and collaboration. James pressed a button, and the screen behind them changed to show their new operating system, the project once known as Horizon, now renamed Phoenix. Phoenix isn't just the most advanced operating system we've ever created, James explained as the demo played. It's the first product developed under our new company structure. The audience watched in awe as James demonstrated features that left their competitors years behind. When the presentation ended, the applause was deafening. Later, at the reception, the three Mitchell men stood together, accepting congratulations from investors and industry leaders. The company's stock had reached an all-time high that morning, and the mood was celebratory. I never thought I'd see this day, William said quietly, looking between his son and brother. The two of you working together, taking the company to heights I never imagined. I still have a lot to learn, James admitted. About business, about trust. And I'm still adjusting to corporate life, Robert added with a smile. But it turns out we make a good team. A young programmer approached, nervously clutching a tablet. Mr. Mitchell, she said, looking between the three men in confusion. Which one? They asked in unison, then laughed. James, she clarified, blushing. I wanted to show you the prototype for that accessibility feature you suggested. As James stepped away to talk with her, William turned to his brother. You know, Robert, when I changed my succession plan, I never expected things to work out quite like this. Neither did I, Robert admitted. I thought I'd find the truth, fix the problems, and go back to my quiet life. Are you sorry you stayed? Robert watched his nephew across the room, gesturing excitedly as he talked with his team. He thought about the past 6 months, the long hours, the challenges, but also the satisfaction of building something meaningful, of healing old wounds between brothers, between father and son. Not for a second, he answered truthfully. William smiled. Family businesses are complicated. They can bring out the worst in people: greed, jealousy, entitlement. He looked around the room at the thriving company they'd saved together. But sometimes, if you're lucky, they'd bring out the best too. As if sensing they were talking about him, James looked over and raised his glass in a silent toast. Robert and William raised theirs in return. 3 men who had nearly lost everything: their company, their relationships, their family legacy, now stood stronger together than any of them had ever been alone.